Hey everybody, again welcome to History Through Film. My name is Miss Corey. I am your teacher. So before we watch every movie, I always do a video, maybe 2 videos about background to what the movie is about. So this time we're going to talk about The Last Samurai. So what are we going to talk about? Ta-da! Samurai. So in this video today, you are going to watch this Ed puzzle and answer the questions that pop up. The questions I ask you that will be in blue text, I just want you to answer on the Ed puzzle. But the ones in magenta text, you are going to actually answer on your study guide. So here's your study guide here. Ta-da! You're going to go under here, which is Lesson 2, Background to the Last Samurai. And you are going to answer these 3 questions today that pop up in magenta text. You're going to answer them right here. And of course, if you have questions, you can certainly let me know. All right, let's get back to this. Ta-da! So, learning targets. You're going to describe the development of civilizations in Eastern Asia. Today, we're going to specifically focus on Japan, and then analyze the emergence, development, and impact of philosophies of this era, specifically the Shinto era. So, Japan, you're like, where's Japan? Yes, Japan is right here in the Pacific Ocean. It's an island nation, as you probably all know. So you can see here it is made up of 4 main islands, with a bunch of little tiny islands around it. You can see it's very close to China as well as the Koreas. So here you can probably recognize some of the big names like Tokyo, Kyoto. World War II enthusiasts will know Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So when you hear of samurai, what do you think of? Now just answer this one on the Ed puzzle. Yeah, you might think of a lot of different things. So maybe you think about like the pictures of samurai, with their like robes and their swords. Or here's more of kind of like a modern picture. So this would be like the late 1800s, early 1900s replication of a samurai and their armor, which has all that really cool like layered looks to it. As well as their swords, or maybe the wooden practice sword that they've used too. So here's the hierarchy of Japan. So on the very top is the emperor. Now he is more of a figurehead than anything else, kind of like how the king and queen in England don't really have a lot of political power anymore. The emperor didn't have political power either. So he was more of like a divine, like a link between Earth and the divine region. The real person who would call the shots in Japan was the shogun. So he had actual power, and then the daimyo, who were wealthy landowners, they were next in line after that. And then you have the samurai. So they were right in the middle. They were the warrior class, which we'll talk about all today. And then the larger class would be the peasants and the artisans. Now, they're actually above the merchant class because Japan believed that the peasants and artisans were essential, right? Like, they're the ones making the food, they're making the daily household goods. They are more important than the merchants, who simply just sell the stuff. So that's why the merchants are on the bottom. All right, so the Heian period. This is the first period of the samurai. So samurai literally means one who serves, and they existed between the 1100s and 1876. That's the date they were outlawed. In the 1100s, they were warriors for hire, so they were mercenaries. The national government during the Heian period had no unified army like the U.S. does today, right? We have a national army. Japan did not have that in the 1100s. So landowners would have to hire samurai in order to protect themselves and their land. So lords, who are people appointed by the national government to look over a large area of land, were the main employers for samurai. And like I mentioned earlier, back on the social pyramid, lords are actually called daimyos. They mean the same thing. Daimyo is just the Japanese word for lord. The daimyo needed to protect their peasants, their farmland, and themselves from rival lords. So here's a picture of Japan, or like the main part of Japan. As you can see here, there is a lot of territorial dispute. the thing about Japanese history, so like prior to the 1800s, Japan was in constant conflict with each other. Um, and because of that, there really was no centralized, unified government. So in 1180 to 1185, there's this thing called the Genpei War. And that actually overthrew the Heian government and established a new military government called the Kamakura Shogunate. And this placed samurais as warriors and soldiers for the government. And because of this, a very few number, but some samurai became very wealthy and gained very high status. But in reality, most samurai were poor. They were just foot soldiers waiting to be hired. So when you hear the word Ronin, that is a name for samurais who did not have a master or were not accepted by any master to get a job. So they traveled around in search for work. So right here is a picture of like a Ronin in a cafe. So question 1, this one I want you to answer on your study guide. What were the roles of samurai? Okay, we're going to skip a few years because we'd be here forever if we talked like through the 1100s to the 1800s. So Japan has a warring states period between 1467 and 1650. That's where a bunch of daimyos and clans battled for control of Japan. I mean, it's a total mess. Like, there's wars every day. And it ended up going into all these different civil wars. There were tons of leaders that rose and fell and assassinations. It's an interesting period, but not super relevant to the movie that we're going to watch. So Japan was constantly being split up between rulers and changing shoguns. But there is hope for Japan to be reunited into one. All they need is a bigger enemy than themselves. So, who will be that enemy that will reunite Japan into one? Have any guesses? It's the United States. Yes, the United States is the big enemy that comes to Japan and makes Japan go, oh shoot, let's get together and defeat the United States. All right, so before 1792, Japan had a very unstable central government, like I described before. Japan had very little to no contact with the rest of the world, the only exception being China and Korea, because that's the closest countries to them. So Japan had a law that no one could do trade with other countries. Okay? No one. It was forbidden. They could not have contact with other countries, specifically European countries. There was a black market and pirating did occur, but legally it could not happen. So they didn't have a centralized government to import, export, and regulate goods. So that's one of the biggest reasons why they didn't trade with other countries, because they just couldn't regulate it. So in 1792, Russia and British merchant ships sat on the shores of Japan. And the Japanese daimyo saw them out there. And they're like, oh crap, if they come to attack us, we have no central military force to fight back. The daimyo knew that if any of these European countries were going to invade, they were probably going to lose. So Japan unites under two main daimyos, the Satsuma and the Choshu daimyos. And together they built up a national army, arsenal, and shipyards. And that's where they moved their capital of Japan to Edo, which today we call Tokyo, but it's in the same location. So here's Tokyo right there. Haha, the US comes. They want to join in the fun, right? They want to get their hands on Japanese goods. So Matthew C. Perry from the US Navy comes with an armed US Navy fleet in 1853. And Japan is like, oh crap, the US is here. So Perry commands Japan to trade with the West. He's like, hey, you got to trade or else we're going to absolutely like annihilate you. So in 1854, Japan signs a treaty with the US and other Western countries to do trading. And if you want to know more about it, it's called the Treaty of Kanagawa, but I won't go into much detail here. So, Japanese merchants are really angry that the government let the Westerners come in for trading. They're like, yo, Japanese government, we're your merchants. We've been doing the trading all this time. Why are you letting these Westerners in? So, because of that, the Japanese really treated foreigners terribly, specifically just the merchant class. And the British and French government were like, dude, what the heck, Japan? Why are you treating us so bad? Don't treat our merchants so poorly. So the Britain and France decided to bomb the crap out of the southwestern coast of Japan in 1864 in a rebellion because of that. So it was not a friendly trading by any means. So Japan unites even more. The economic and physical pressure of Western forces led to the overthrowing of the Japanese government. And this leads to the Meiji Restoration, which is a huge turning point in Japanese history. So this was from 1868 to 1894. And this is when Japan fully embraces ideas and cultures from other countries. So as you can even see here, and the emperor himself, right, go from the traditional clothes of Japan to all of a sudden this Western uniform. So just to note, The Last Samurai takes place in approximately 1877, so right during the Meiji Restoration. It is very loosely based off the events of the Satsuma Rebellion, which I'll talk about in the next few slides. The movie is historical fiction, so the vast majority of these characters are not real, and the plot is very Hollywoodized. But just to note that. So let's talk a little bit more about the Meiji Restoration. So that happened between 1868 and 1894, and it was a total change of the Japanese government. Meiji Tenno becomes the new emperor. As you saw in the last slide, he's wearing Western clothes. The emperor saw Britain and France colonizing China. And during this time period when Britain and France were colonizing China, they gained total control of the Chinese government. Europeans exploited people for labor, and they also exploited China's land for resources. And Japan was like, oh my God, Europe is totally like messing up China. We don't want that with us. So Japan did not want the same fate as China had. So Emperor Meiji decided to make treaties with Western countries. Again, they made one with the United States. U.S. put themselves as like some sort of like anti-colonizer. They're like, hey, Japan, we won't colonize you. We just want to be friends, since they were once a colony themselves. So the U.S. had a very strong military as well. So that's why Japan kind of liked them. But on the downside as well, the U.S. became allies after Matthew Perry threatened to attack Japan. So a lot of reasons why they became allies. So here's my question number 2 that I want you to write in your study guide. Why did the U.S. and Japan become allies? All right, so, if The Last Samurai takes place in 1877, what happened approximately 12 years before this in the United States? Think back to your U.S. history days. That's right, it's the U.S. Civil War. So that only happened about 12 years prior to when this movie is supposedly supposed to take place. So Civil War, 1861 to 1865. I'm sure a lot of you have learned about this already, but it was the North, the Union, versus the South, which was the Confederacy. The North won, slavery was abolished. Something called Reconstruction happened after the Civil War. That's where Union soldiers occupied the South to make sure they were following the new anti-slavery and economy rules. Reconstruction ended in 1877. And this is when the U.S. had a bunch of its military leaders and soldiers without jobs. They're like, oh my gosh, we have all these like really highly skilled people. Reconstruction has ended. What are we going to do with them? And the U.S. also has lots of firearms, uniforms, and other war supplies just laying around. So what they did is they sent military leaders to Japan to help train their new allies in Western warfare. Okay, so that's a really big part of the movie. That's why Tom Cruise's character is in Japan, is because of that. So the U.S. trained Japanese soldier recruits in Western warfare. Beforehand, firearms were very scarce in Japan. Warfare was usually just on horseback and with swords in Japan prior to the U.S. coming in. And the U.S. helped supply Japan with weapons and training from the U.S. military leaders, which is, again, why Tom Cruise's character is like in Japan in the movie. And it benefited Japan by modernizing them to be more powerful in warfare, and also ready Japan if other European colonizers wanted to invade Japan. And of course, guns are more powerful than rebel samurai swords. All right, question number 3. Write this one in your study guide. How did the U.S. help the Meiji government modernize their military? All right, so let's talk about some rebellions, because that's a major plot point to The Last Samurai. So, not all Japanese people were on board with being allies with the United States. So they wanted to stay in their traditional ways they've been living for over 200 years. So there were several rebellions that sparked during this 1800s Meiji Restoration time period. They're mostly led by former samurai who were banned back in 1868. The biggest rebellion was the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, which is what The Last Samurai is loosely based on. So, in the Satsuma Rebellion, Saigo Takamori was the leader. Here's a picture of him right here. He was a former noble and military leader, and he opposed the westernization of Japan. So Saigo gained a following of former samurai, and that led to a rebellion against the central government, who sent their newly westernized army to defeat them. And the rebellion happened here in the southern region of Japan, right here on the southern part of the map. So there was a series of 3 battles in the Satsuma Rebellion. There was the siege of Kumamoto Castle, the Battle of Tabaruzaka, and the Battle of Shiroyama. And Saigo and his samurai were killed in the Battle of Shiroyama, ending the rebellion. So westernization ended up winning. And it's unsure if he was killed or committed seppuku, which is where seppuku is where like a person commits like a ritualistic suicide where they like stab them in the stomach and then cut off the head. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so I won't give away any more details because that's just going to spoil the movie, and that's not very fun. So let's talk about some of the characters in the movie. The first one is going to be Tom Cruise's character, Nathan Algren. So he fought in the Civil War and American Indian War, and he is haunted by his treatment toward the Native Americans that he killed during the American Indian War, and he agrees to help the Meiji government train the troops and gets captured by Lord Moritsugu Katsumoto and is taken to a village where Nathan learns the life of being a samurai. Woo! All right, so Lord Moritsugu Katsumoto. So he is based off of the real-life character of Saigo Takamori, which we just talked about. In the movie, he was the Emperor Meiji's prize teacher. He was also a former daimyo, and he is the leader now of the rebellion against westernization. There's Taka. She is the younger sister of Lord Katsumoto, and she's also the widow of a samurai that Nathan kills early in the movie. Slight spoiler, sorry. There's Nobutada Katsumoto, who is the son of Lord Katsumoto, and he becomes friends with Nathan and teaches him Japanese culture. And then there's Colonel Bagley. That is Nathan's former commanding officer in the American Indian Wars, and he sees samurai as not civilized beings. He also trains the Meiji government's troops in Western warfare. And then there's Matsui Omura. Sorry. All right. So he's actually he's kind of like that mysterious character in the movie. So he's Meiji Emperor's advisor. He supports westernization, as you can tell, because he's wearing like a tuxedo. And it makes money off of building Japan's railroads. And he wants to wipe out all of the samurai. All right, so wrap up. We learned a lot today about the history of the samurai and their original purpose. We talked about the Meiji Restoration, how the U.S. and Japan became allies, also about the Satsuma Rebellion, and some characters in the movie. So next up, you are going to watch U1-L3 Warrior Graveyard Ed Puzzle. Make sure you watch the Ed Puzzle all the way to the end. Answer the questions that pop up during the video onto your study guide, so under the Lesson 3 section. After that, you're going to start watching The Last Samurai. So I split it up into 30-minute chunks. So you're just going to watch U1-L4, which is the first 30 minutes, and then you can keep on moving on to L5, L6, L7 until you watch all the movie. And then make sure you fill out your study guide as the movie plays. Here, let me show you that in just a second. Okay, where are we at here? There we go. So here's your study guide here. So as you watch The Last Samurai, answer these questions on your study guide, okay? So the ones under lessons 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, as you watch them, answer the questions. Okay, all right. And then, of course, if you have questions or if you want to learn more, please email me or come to office hours. My office hours are Mondays from noon to 1. Yeah, so just let me know. Or else everyone got their permission slips in, so awesome job. This week I'll also be posting the Google form about what movie you want to watch during the warfare unit, because I let you choose one of the movies. So just keep your eyes on your emails for that. All right, that's all. See ya.